Hello, I'm Junya Makino, a Japanese violin player. I've been actively playing modern music and contemporary music in Europe and Japan. I would like to share you the history of 20th century music. This is going to be a series, and today I focus on the decade from 1950 to 1960. In the 10 years from 1950, various new music and composition techniques came out, and the content became more, so I divided it into two parts. In the previous episode, I talked about total serialism, music of indeterminacy, electronic music, and music using stochastic composition. In this second half, I'd like to introduce you to music concrete, electronic music, Soviet music, and Japanese music. Let's take a concrete look. Metastasis by Yanis Xenakis, introduced last time, was calculated and created by IBM's computer, but the piece is performed by the performer using acoustic instruments. So this is also music of the indeterminacy, but if we take it in a tremendous broad sense, such as all music made using electronic device is electronic music, we may call it electronic music. The history of the emergence of electronic music, which has evolved since the 1950s, is related to the invention of electronic music such as theremin and ondes maintenant, which were invented in the 1910s, tape recording technology, and the invention of computers. Among them, music concrete, which records and edits sounds, and electronic music, which tries to create the sound itself, will be distinguished. Nowadays, these distinctions are meaningless, and they are full of pieces that can't be taken either way, and as early as 1956, Stockhausen composed pieces that are difficult to classify, such as Gesang der Jünglinge. I'd like to briefly explain each of them here. One is music concrete. It's finished by recording, editing, and processing regulated sounds such as railroad sounds and other real sounds and musical instrument sounds. Pierre Schaeffer, a French radio broadcast engineer, was the main person, and it was centered around Paris. The first work is Schaeffer's 5 Studies of Noises. Schaeffer formed the Music Concrete research group with Pierre Henry in 1951. The other is electronic music. It is composed by synthesizing and processing materials such as pure tones and white noises that doesn't contain overtones. In 1951, various music was composed by centered on Stockhausen at an electronic music studio established in a broadcasting station in Köln, Germany. Stockhausen first composed pure electronic music works such as Study 1 and Study 2. And in 1956, he created a work that fused music concrete and electronic music called Gesang der Jünglinge, that combined voice and electronic sound. With the opening of electronic music studios in Köln, these kind of studios were opened one after another in Milan, Tokyo, New York, and other parts of the world. So as we can see, in the 1950s, new styles of music began to blossom one after another in post-war Europe. Now, let's take a look at the Soviet Union and Japanese music situation during this period. Entering the 1950s, the Soviet Union is at the end of the era. That was Stalin's death in 1953. After that, Stalin's strict crackdown on art began to be eased, and in 1956, Khrushchev, who succeeded Stalin, criticized Stalin's cult of personality, and finally thawing in relations between the United States and the Soviet Union began. the Tsar first restored the honor of Shostakovich, who was criticized by Sidanov, and the works of Sergei Rachmaninoff, Nikolai Medtner, which were also the subject of criticism, were premiered one after another. In 1957, pianist Glenn Gould visited the Soviet Union to play contemporary music. The concert was greeted with enthusiastic applause. From the end of the 1950s, the International Youth Festival was held in Moscow, which led to the influx of information from the outside. There, up-and-coming composer Sofia Wydrina, Alfred Schnittoke, and the others began to study Stravinsky, Bartók, Bourgeois, Stockhausen, collage technique, electronic music, and more all at once. One of the excellent composers, Alfred Schnittoke, composed the oratorio Nagasaki in 1958, which was based on the dropping of atomic bombs on Nagasaki cities in Japan. This work was composed as a graduation work of his Moscow Conservatory, and the text is a Russian translation of Sofronov's poem, Toson Shimazaki's, and Eisaku Yoneda's as well. In 1959, Bernstein led the New York Philharmonic to overwhelm the oppression of the authorities and perform the Rite of Spring by Stravinsky. He communicated Stravinsky's intention to return home. After that, Stravinsky's visit to the Soviet Union was approved. At that time, Bernstein also met with elites and young musicians in the Soviet music industry, such as Shostakovich and Aram Khachaturian, which led to the complete lifting of the ban on Stravinsky's music and the free playing. Stravinsky's composition technique had a wide influence on Schnittoke, Schedrin, and others. Finally, let's take a look at Japan in the 1950s. Since 1945, avant-garde music composition technique such as 12-tone technique, serial music, electronic music, music concrete, and electric music have been practiced in Japan almost at the same time, as they are practiced in Europe and the United States. It was going to be incorporated. In the 1950s, the post-war turmoil subsided, and Yoshiro Irino wrote a treatise introducing the 12-tone techniques from 1951 and actually used the 12-tone technique to concert for 7 instruments, which will be a pioneering work in Japan. Toshiro Mayuzumi produced the music concrete work XYZ in 1953. And 1955, he worked with Makoto Moroi on the electronic music work 7 Variations, the first music concrete work in Japan. It became a pioneer of electronic music works. Also, from the latter half of the 1950s to the 1960s, there was an active movement to introduce Western avant-garde music of the same era to Japan. The 20th Century Music Institute, which was formed in 1957 by Minao Shibata, Toshiro Mayuzumi, Yoshiro Irino, and Makoto Moroi, regularly holds music festival to introduce the works of Messiaen, Bourgeois, and Stockhausen to Japan. It greatly stimulated Japan's avant-garde music composition activities. It was in Japan in the 1950s that not only was influenced by Western avant-garde music, but it also proceeded a unique style from which it became internationally acclaimed. That's all for this time, so I will summarize it. Stockhausen, Bourgeois, Xenakis, Schaeffer, and others started composing using electronic devices and produced music concrete and electronic music works one after another. In the Soviet Union, thaw has occurred and the relation of artistic regulations has begun to allow up and coming composers to absorb Western avant-garde composition techniques. It was in Japan in the 1950s that not only was influenced by Western avant-garde music, but it also proceeded a unique style from which it became internationally acclaimed. That's it for this time. Next time I will talk about from 1960 to 1970. Thanks for watching and see you soon.